Chapter 349. The Sea, 2. In the vast southern seas, there existed a region that could be deemed the very edge of the sea. Mysterious and foreboding, these waters were unlike other parts of the southern sea. They were not warm but instead felt like perpetual winter. No snow descended upon its surface, and scarcely any wind whispered its secrets. The mere breath would frost upon exhaling, and water would freeze upon contact with the chilly air. And yet, despite the cold, ice floes and icebergs were rare. This place bore many names such as the Sea of Death or the Unreachable Ocean. But to Iris it was not unfamiliar. Seas like the Sea of Death or the Unreachable Ocean had not been rare 300 years ago. Every ocean and land of the realm of Helmuth had been filled with death and inaccessibility, a time when unexplained and incongruous phenomena were the norm. Modern Helmuth was no longer so, but such was the age 300 years prior. Yet this feeling was different than mere familiarity. It was her first time visiting this ocean. Yet it brought about a comfort and longing reminiscent of home, a warmth akin to a cradle. Even amidst the bone-chilling air, there was an odd warmth Iris felt. But why? Iris was a dark elf. Before her fall, she had been an elven ranger hailing from a dense, verdant forest. Though she had seen the sea several times, this was her first time living upon its waves. Yet she still yearned for the sea. Wrapped in a heavy coat, Iris stepped out of her room. Due to the lack of wind, the sound of the waves was barely audible. But Iris' keen senses picked up the scent of salt in the frigid air, an aroma she wouldn't find in a forest. A smell she hadn't inhaled in over a year, yet it felt anciently familiar, a nostalgic fragrance that resonated deep within her. Taking a deep breath, she placed a large hat on her head. She had several reasons for venturing into the region of the Salgalta Sea. Firstly, it would serve as a base to defend against enemy raids. In the past, Iris and her pirate crew used uninhabited islands or simply roamed the sea. However, as their influence grew, they needed a solid base. Another reason was the rumor about something being submerged in the depths of the Salgalta Sea. There were many tales about what might lay in the depths of the Salgalta Sea, the most popular being the lair of a dragon. For centuries, such stories had excited many explorers, especially pirates. Countless treasure seekers and pirates ventured into these waters with hopes of extracting the dragon's hoard. Of course, most of them not only failed to retrieve the treasure but found themselves sinking, joining the depths of the Salgalta Sea. No one truly knew if the depths hid a dragon's lair and treasures, but by now dozens of ships had found their watery graves there. Treasure? Of course she wanted it. Especially if it was a dragon's hoard, which would be worth a fortune. Finding it would ensure a life free from financial concerns. Yet, the real reason Iris had come to these waters differed from such clear-cut reasons. Perhaps at first such reasons had attracted her. Or had they? Iris herself could not be certain. Clear evidence eluded her. She was uncertain as to even explain what she felt. Yet, deep within her heart, a thought lingered. Even if this sea wasn't unique, devoid of strategic importance or buried treasures, she felt she would have come here. Without any particular reason, she staunchly believed she would have eventually arrived and stayed upon these waters. From the moment she first heard its name to her journey here, the landscapes she witnessed, everything affirmed an inexplicable conviction to Iris. Princess. A dark elf who had served Iris for hundreds of years, approached as she produced a pipe from within her possessions and offered it to Iris. Noticing the remnant tears on Iris' cheeks, the dark elf asked, "Have you dreamt again?" Feeling the gaze of the dark elf, Iris brushed her face once more before answering, "Yes. The dreams come more frequently now." "Did you not dream just yesterday?" asked the dark elf. "I take it as a sign that I'm on the right path," responded Iris. Drawing a pipe from her coat pocket, she placed it between her lips. The dark elf instinctively brought forth a flint and lit it for her. Biting on the pipe, Iris said, "Always the same dream of my father and brothers. Perhaps the remnants of my father's dark power are guiding me." The meaning of the dream remained elusive. Iris took a long breath from the pipe, then asked, "How is the wise Sienna?" "She's yet to break away from Lionheart of Kiel," responded the dark elf. "Humph. Do you really think so? That dreadful wizard hasn't perished even after 300 years. It seems age hasn't mellowed her either," commented Iris scornfully. Rumors of Sienna's return had reached her ears. Wasn't it said she tried to submerge the entirety of the royal palace of Arath? Iris recalled Sienna's visage from long ago, her face contorting in disdain. Yet she remained quiet right until she went into seclusion, said Iris. Well, times have changed in various ways since then, the dark elf said evenly. Indeed, they have changed significantly, Iris agreed. The hero Vermouth had made a pact with the demon king of incarceration 300 years ago. But the present hero, Eugene Lionheart, didn't seem intent on maintaining or continuing the legacy of his lineage. Even if he wished to, he couldn't. The demon king of incarceration had already forewarned the end of their agreement. 3 centuries had passed and a new hero had emerged. Still, 2 heroes from the era of war remained alive, and among them the wise Sienna, especially to Iris, was someone to be wary of. That woman isn't even an elf, yet she deludes herself into believing she is one. I can still clearly remember those glaring eyes and the bloody tears. It still haunts me. Iris' tone conveyed the severity of the matter. She continued, it wasn't just the calamitous Sienna. Every monster of that era was maddening and terrifying. They had been monsters led by Vermouth of Despair, including Hamel of Extermination, Sienna of Calamity, Molin of Terror, and Anise of Hell. The dark elf, who had survived that era alongside Iris, shivered after recalling encounters with those 5 monstrous beings. No matter how one looked at it, the survival of the dark elf and Iris seemed purely due to good fortune. The dark elf hesitated, then softly suggested, Princess, perhaps it's best if you hide? The sea is vast. Although the calamitous Sienna has returned, she would not come here right away. So why don't we just lie low for now and assess the situation? To abandon all that we have achieved? Iris asked as if in thought. They are but mere pirates. With your highness leading the rebels of fury, we possess the might to rebuild at any moment, the dark elf explained. Perhaps you are right. Iris did not deny the truth of it. Even with a fleet of hundreds of pirate ships, they were just that, pirates. Numerically large but not a formidable force. The true strength of this place lay with Iris, who possessed the demon eye of darkness, the dark elves who had grown in number over centuries serving her, and the beast-folk mercenaries who had joined after Jagan's demise. Their lifespans were incomparably longer than humans. I know not when the promised end spoken of by the demon king of incarceration will be, but with such a forewarning, a new era of war is on the horizon. When that time comes, the calamitous Sienna will inevitably be drawn to Helmuth, Iris said, understanding what the dark elf meant while suggesting to stay low. If Iris remained hidden, Sienna would not venture into these waters. And so, for decades even, she might lie in wait. No matter how powerful Sienna of Calamity is, she won't surpass the demon king of incarceration, Iris said confidently. Even with the presence of Vermouth of Despair, the continent had failed to defeat the demon king of incarceration. They now had a new champion in Eugene Lionheart, but could he truly compare to Vermouth? Not a chance, thought Iris as she exhaled a puff of smoke from her cigar. She had faced Eugene in battle. Though she hadn't used her full strength, she had gauged his level. He was no match for Vermouth. And it wasn't just Eugene. Even Carmen Lionheart, reputed to be the strongest of the Lionheart clan, had left an impression on Iris. She might have made a name for herself even 300 years ago with her. But that was just it, only that much. The 5 monstrous humans too hadn't surpassed the demon king of incarceration. Would a hero inferior to Vermouth, even if he was wielding the holy sword, truly make it to the gates of Babel? Rumors have it that he's improved considerably, but still lacking. With these thoughts, Iris became acutely aware of her own position. She might be eyeing the seat of the Demon King, but she was not yet there. What did it mean to be the Demon King anyway? Amass enough power, hold vast territories, and have countless subordinates? Before she could think any further, a piercing pain suddenly shot through her eyes. Unconsciously, Iris clutched her eyelids, reeling from the discomfort. "Your Highness," the dark elf called out in concern. "It's nothing," Iris said dismissively. This wasn't the first time. Recently, her eyes had been throbbing occasionally. And it wasn't just the pain. Every time this sudden pain struck Iris Demon, it beheld a place entirely different from where she currently was. It was no different this time as well. In a fleeting moment of pain, Iris glimpsed the depths of the sea within her eyes. There was a darkness as profound as the night, bubbling and boiling amidst the deep ocean's abyss. "Where are the dwarves?" asked Iris. Drawing her coat around her, Iris began to walk with the concerned dark elf trailing behind her. "They're at work. They should be surfacing soon," the dark elf replied immediately. "Are they being watched properly?" Iris inquired further. "Of course. Every time they descend they are always accompanied by my guards. But it seems there have been no significant findings." While listening to the report, Iris blinked. Suddenly, a pitch-black darkness appeared before her, crafted by the power of the demon eye of darkness. She stepped into it, followed by the dark elf. The darkness created by the demon eye was interconnected, forming passageways. As they entered, the scenery changed in an instant. A pirate ship was floating amidst the vast Salgalta Sea. The resting pirates immediately stood at attention upon her appearance. "You've arrived." The dark elves standing near the pirates approached Iris. She gave a slight nod in acknowledgement and then turned to look for the dwarves. "They seem to be faring well," Iris smirked, seeing the dwarves sitting in a corner of the deck. The dwarves were gasping for breath. The craftsmen had been abducted from Hammer Island during the last raid on Shimuin. Among them were the youngest and strongest dwarves. The dwarves trembled, their beards shaking as they stared at Iris. Then a few voices could be heard from among them. "Do not taunt us. We've only been up for not even 10 minutes. Even resilient dwarves like us have limits. At this rate our bodies won't hold for long." Listening to the complaints, Iris taunted, "So? Shall we replace you with others? Shall I call upon your masters?" "That, please don't. Let us rest a little, and we'll dive again," the young dwarves pleaded with tears in their eyes. Iris watched them silently for a moment, then chuckled, "Worry not. I have no intention of using the older dwarves, even if you were to perish." The dwarves had nothing to say to that. "So, any progress?" Iris asked, getting down to business. The dwarves hesitated to respond, a silence Iris found displeasing. Her eyes narrowed and the darkness pooling around the dwarves began receding slowly. "What are you doing?" The dwarves cried out in panic. The receding shadow was connected to the profound depths of the sea where their comrades were laboring in cumbersome heavy diving suits, barely able to move. "It seems you lack a sense of urgency because of my leniency," Iris whispered, her eyes narrowing further. To the dwarves, it was maddening and unbelievable. Her leniency? What in the world was she talking about? In the first place, she had abducted them and was ordering them about with such an impossible task. Finally, a dwarf cried, tears streaming down his bearded face, What do you want from us?" They had crafted the diving suit as instructed. It was designed to withstand the crushing depths, but it was, in truth, a creation unworthy of the proud craftsmanship of the dwarves. In any other circumstance, no amount of gold could convince them to proclaim such a creation finished. Yet in this dire moment, there was no time for the pride of craftsmanship. The makeshift suit's sole advantage was its reduced weight, but even then only the sturdy race of the dwarves could handle it. A human would be immobilized in it. A dwarf couldn't take it anymore and cried out in despair, "We found the sunken ship as ordered, even readied it for recovery. Yet why do you cast us adrift in this dark abyss? What more do you want? Do you truly believe even for a moment that a dragon's hoard lies hidden beneath these waves?" Another dwarf asked, trying to sound rational. "Such tales are tantalizing," Iris sneered, her gaze lost in the encroaching darkness as the shadows expanded around the dwarves, loosening their threatening grip on the pipes carrying the oxygen to the working dwarves. "Truth be told, I find that dragon hoard story hard to believe." "A dragon's hoard? What are the chances?" "Then why, for the love of all, have you?" Iris interrupted before the dwarf could finish. "Whether it's a dragon's hoard or not, there is something down here. I'm certain of it." Iris tilted her head slightly. "And what might that be?" "I honestly have no idea. But if you don't want to die, you will have to find it." This is madness," the dwarves muttered in horror. But Iris was unfazed. "Oh, I am well aware of how cruel my words sound. The ocean is vast and there are merely 10 of you. And that's why your mentors are tirelessly hammering away, right?" With a wicked chuckle, Iris plunged her hand into the newfound darkness. A scream echoed as she pulled an elderly dwarf's head from the shadows before she continued in a threateningly quiet voice. "You were provided with all the materials needed. Is this all the craftsmanship the unsightly dwarf race, with nothing but their hammering skills, can manage? She had expected a diving suit fit for anyone, not just a dwarf. Is it that challenging? Iris continued, enraged. I even offered my own dark power to help. Simply infuse my dark power into the metal, then fashion the diving suit from it. Simple, right? Who humans are incredibly fragile. Perhaps if it were for a dark elf. The elderly dwarf began explaining but was interrupted. You expect me to thrust my subordinates into those fathomless depths? Why should I undertake such madness? Iris asked. Very well, I understand. The design is ready and a prototype is being made. The elderly dwarf finally gave in, making no more excuses. You have a week. Produce at least 50 suits within that time. Fail and these young lads will have to shoulder the work meant for 50. With those stern words, Iris pushed the elderly dwarf's head back into the darkness. Then turning to the younger dwarves, she berated, What are you all gawking at? Surely you've rested long enough. Must I kick you back to work? The dwarves staggered to their feet. As they donned the diving suits set aside, Iris snickered at their timid actions and mocked, Worry not. I'll ensure you have plenty of ale just as promised. On Larupa Island of Shimuan. When Gundor Ironhammer entered the Lionheart mansion, his eyes widened in surprise. Before him stood barrels upon barrels, each one seemingly filled to the brim. He stared at them for a moment, trying to make sense of the sight. What in the world is this? Gundor asked, genuinely not able to comprehend the situation before him. He had indeed entered the mansion of Lionheart as desired. While he had hoped to visit the main house of the Lionheart clan in Kiel and perhaps even see its treasure vault, that could wait for another time. No, but in the first place, if the actual Eugene Lionheart resided in this mansion, there would be no need to journey to distant Kiel. After all, how many artifacts did he possess? It's ale, Sienna responded while knocking on one of the oak barrels with a grin. A bit of hush money. Hush, what? Gundor asked, sure he had misheard the lady. Silencing gold. Not enough. If you wish, I can offer more ale, Sienna elaborated further. No. I don't quite, Gundor hesitated to reply. Didn't Carmen inform you in advance? Our presence in this mansion must remain a secret, said Sienna. Gundor nodded, saying, I did sign a confidentiality agreement. Not just that, there will be a magical contract too. But a contract alone feels rather impersonal, don't you think? Sienna cleared her throat, stopping herself from uttering a potentially derogatory statement. Porf. Although we brought you here because of your earnest wish, I, the wise Sienna, am not so heartless as to forcibly try and shut your mouth. Thus I prepared this. The price for his silence was ale, carefully chosen by a niece, even if reluctantly. Surely this much ale will keep you silent? Asked Sienna. The dwarf didn't know how to respond. Why so quiet? Surely this isn't insufficient for you? Such a greedy dwarf. Sienna crossed her arms while staring at the Gundor, who remained silent. Lady Sienna, it seems he dislikes the ale. Eugene, who had been quietly standing beside them, voiced his concern, fearing the wise Sienna might be labeled a fierce bigot among the dwarves. Nonsense. There isn't a dwarf alive who dislikes ale. Even 300 years ago, they'd work for a mere mug of it instead of gold. Sienna dismissed Eugene's suggestion as if it was the most obvious thing to do. She shot Eugene a glance, questioning his knowledge. However, in Eugene's opinion, Sienna's perception was problematic. Raised among elves, she had inherited the widespread elven prejudice against dwarves. In the times of Helmuth 300 years ago, gold wasn't as valued as it was now. Back then, items like drinkable spirits, food, and tools were more treasured. What exactly do you think of dwarves? Angered by the deep-rooted prejudiced remark, Gundor questioned Sienna fiercely. In an era long gone, who would utter such antiquated words? Had it been another human, he might have struck the speaker down at once. But Sienna could not comprehend Gundor's anger. From the start, she wasn't even aware that her words bore the weight of racial prejudice, thus remarking further, dwarves will be dwarves after all. When she was young, her elder brother, Signard, often regaled her with ancient tales of the elven kind. In these stories, the dwarves were more frequently referred to not by their name but by derogatory terms, like smelly shorty poop bags. However, Sienna refrained from using such names. To her, a dwarf was just a dwarf. And this alone made her believe that she was quite progressive in terms of racial equality. To think that such words would come from the wise Sienna. You're offering me a ton of ale to keep a secret? Are you suggesting that the beer pouring into my mouth weighs more than a contract I personally penned and stamped? Gundor shouted, unable to control his anger. Oh, come on, don't twist my words. I trust the contract, of course, but I thought adding the ale you love would be a nice touch, retorted Sienna. Well then, Gundor began, only to be interrupted as Sienna's eyes narrowed. Don't you want it? Gundor just stared at Sienna, trying to control his rage. Don't you? Sienna asked dangerously. Under the gaze of the legendary archwizard, Gundor trembled before responding. It's a thoughtful gift. Sienna continued to look at Gundor. Gundor gulped, then continued, perfectly suited for a dwarf's taste. I'm grateful. Thank you. The task of expressing racial indignation seemed too perilous under the intensity of Sienna's gaze. Moreover, his desire for the artifacts of the Lionheart clan was too overwhelming. Finally, Gundor mustered a weak smile. In return, Sienna flashed a triumphant grin at Eugene. That's when Eugene acknowledged something inside his heart. This ill-tempered woman was hailed as the wise Sienna only because she had penned it herself in a fairy tale. Chapter 350. The C3. There was no reason for Eugene to avoid a meeting with Gundor. While Eugene knew well that Vermouth's artifacts didn't necessarily require any maintenance, there was no harm in giving it a look over. At the moment, Eugene possessed the Annihilation Hammer and the Demon Spear among the arsenal of the Demon Kings. Neither of these weapons harbored the remnants of the Demon King's essence, as was Carmen's concern. Any residual power had been completely obliterated during the incident with Uid, and the current powers of the Annihilation Hammer and Demon Spear were now manifested by Eugene's own mana. At first, Eugene had not paid much attention to such matters. But after hearing about Vermouth from Rhyzakia, it was hard not to feel uneasy. The Moonlight Sword, Eugene's thoughts drifted back to this weapon. It was a blade whose true nature remained a mystery even 300 years ago. But now he knew its identity. The destruction wrought by the Moonlight Sword's glow was in actuality the power of destruction. Thus, the Moonlight Sword was like the Demon Spear and Annihilation Hammer, a tool of the Demon King. To wield such weapons, one needed the blood of Vermouth, the blood of the Lionhearts. While not everything was clear, this much was certain. Vermouth's existence was intertwined with the Demon King's. Ironically, however, Eugene could still wield the Holy Sword. Yet, the God of Light did not particularly strike him as a benevolent deity. Gundor was speechless from the excitement. His eyes trembled with astonishment as he beheld the array of weapons Eugene always kept in his cloak. What in the world is this? Gundor asked. Among the many weapons, the Moonlight Sword, a blade broken mid-length, truly captured Gundor's gaze. Gundor tilted his head while eyeing the Moonlight Sword intently. It couldn't have been like that from the beginning, commented Gundor. It broke, Eugene responded simply. Do you want me to fix it? Asked Gundor. No, it can't be repaired, Eugene said with a shrug. Such words were a slight to a dwarf's pride, especially one of a blacksmith lineage. With a snort, Gundor pointed to the Moonlight Sword. It does look of unique make. But there isn't a weapon in this world that a dwarf can't mend. I told you it can't be fixed, repeated Eugene. I don't understand why you're so certain. Let's take a closer look. Gundor remained stubborn and reached for the Moonlight Sword. For a moment, Eugene wondered if he should just allow the dwarf to touch it, but at the last second, Eugene changed his mind. Touch it and you die, Eugene said, grabbing Gundor's shoulder as a warning. Taken aback by such an extreme statement, Gundor looked at Eugene in surprise when he further explained, Don't misunderstand. It's not that I'll kill you. The sword will. What do you mean? Asked Gundor shakily. It's a cursed blade that no one but me can wield. Eugene's reply left no room for questions. While there might have been a touch of exaggeration, it wasn't entirely untrue. Holding the Moonlight Sword in one's hand tainted the mind. Even Hamel and Molin were driven mad 3 centuries ago, their minds wavering merely from briefly grasping the Moonlight Sword. Then what would happen if a dwarf, obviously of lesser mental fortitude, were to hold it? Their psyche might shatter entirely, rendering them senseless. Was such a state any different from death? A deep sigh escaped Eugene's lips as he warned again. Likewise, Don't even think about touching the other weapons of the Demon King. But Lady Carmen asked for a thorough examination of the Demon King's weapons, came Gondor's retort. Just tell her what she wants to hear. There was no issue, was there? Responded Eugene. Despite often being incomprehensible in all her actions, Carmen was truly a noble soul. She had insisted on bringing Gondor out of concern that Eugene might be adversely affected by the artifacts of the Demon Kings. Eugene knew all too well just how horrifying and relentless the Demon Kings were. They were entities that, no matter how thoroughly killed, refused to truly perish. Ewad's descent into madness had been partly due to the remnants of the Demon Kings that lingered in the Annihilation Hammer. Gondor stayed quiet as he contemplated Eugene's words. A somber expression crossed Eugene's face as he recalled that time. The remnants of the Demon King controlling Ewad had been obsessively fixated on the blood of the Lionheart lineage. From this, one could infer that the influence of this blood was undeniable. Eugene was perpetually on guard against this. He remained on guard and conscious of himself. Moreover, he sought frequent validation from Christina and Anise as well. Even after using the Annihilation Hammer, the Demon's Spear and the Moonlight Sword multiple times, nothing seemed amiss. Eugene remained unscathed. After a slight pause, Gondor said, Can't be helped then. I might be curious, but I don't wish for madness. With a slightly disappointed look, Gondor turned to Eugene. That ring, it looks ancient and unique. Is it another cursed item that none but you can handle? No. I just didn't see a need to flaunt it, so I kept it on, answered Eugene. It doesn't look all that appealing after losing its luster. Give it here. I'll make it shine for you, Gondor suggested. There was no particular reason to refuse. Eugene removed the Agarotha's ring from his left ring finger and set it beside the weapons. Gondor, however, initially ignored the ring, instead picking up WYD first. Storm's sword WYD. Ah, it's truly a masterpiece, commented Gondor. Hamel, this dwarf does have an eye for beauty, Tempest remarked with satisfaction. Eugene observed Gondor with a skeptical look. The dwarf donned a thick pair of glasses, adjusting various lenses to meticulously inspect WYD. Is there any need for repair? Asked Eugene. A bit of polishing wouldn't hurt. My greed calls me to tinker here and there, but that could be disastrous. Such relics can backfire if carelessly tampered with, said Gondor as he observed WYD from different angles. Backfire? Eugene asked, taken aback. To put it bluntly, one might lose the abilities originally imbued in it. You're a wizard too, aren't you, Mr. Eugene? Objects passed down from the Lionheart clan. No, the Great Vermouth are exceptionally special, Gondor explained. Weapons bestowed with magic were commonly known as artifacts. Yet the term artifact originally referred to items not from this age but from ancient civilizations. Among those, the term artifact specially referred to relics endowed with magical capabilities. These objects are all genuine artifacts. They cannot be reproduced with the magic and technology of this age. Thus, they must be handled with the utmost care, Gondor advised. Upon hearing Gondor's words, Eugene gave the matter some thought before speaking to Tempest. Come to think of it, since when has WYD existed? I do not know, Tempest's answer was surprising. You don't? You really don't know? Eugene was genuinely baffled. Tempest explained, my connection with WE began when Vermouth first held it. I have no memories before that. How does that make sense? WE must have existed before Vermouth held it, right? Eugene's questions weren't baseless. Of course it must have. But as to when exactly WYD came into being, I cannot say. Tempest's answer was far from satisfactory. Eugene found these words puzzling. Seeing his confusion, Tempest elaborated in a calm tone. Hamel, spirits are near immortal beings, yet they are not truly eternal. Death comes to all existences sooner or later. What happens when a spirit dies? Do they vanish? Eugene queried. We do not vanish. We simply cycle. If they possess self-awareness, even the grandest spirit king will eventually see themselves wear away. And that erosion inevitably leads to madness. Tempest paused for a moment. The essence of a spirit is purity. A wind spirit is a pure wind and a flame spirit is a pure flame. To such beings, madness is an impurity. The death of a spirit occurs when impurities infiltrate. They shatter their own identity to purify themselves. It's like suicide. Eugene couldn't help voicing this thought. But Tempest wasn't angered. You're not wrong. All spirits exist in this manner. I am the current Wind Spirit King. However, I am not the first and I do not know how many have been before me. What is clear is that the previous Spirit King was caught in the cycle, and then I became the new Spirit King. From my perspective, my connection with WNYD began 300 years ago. Eugene recalled his past life. Vermouth had already possessed WNYD when he first met Hamel. Tempest continued. W lay dormant in the snowy lands ruled by the Buyer tribe. Why it was there I do not know. You wouldn't know how that bastard Vermouth found it either, would you? Eugene asked. Of course not, Tempest affirmed confidently. It wasn't just WNYD that left Eugene curious. Rather, all of the weapons that had belonged to Vermouth, the ancient artifacts, were the same. What sort of ruins are these? Ancient ruins. Do you think I asked you because I didn't know that? How did you discover this place? The Holy Sword revealed it. The God of Light decreed that the weapons slumbering here would aid in saving the world. The God of Light has not forsaken us. Truly, Sir Vermouth is blessed. It was a conversation that seemed trivial in his past life. But thinking about it now, it felt eerily peculiar. Eugene was also wielding the Holy Sword proficiently, but he had never heard the voice of the God of Light from it. In the end, the revelations he had received were influenced by a niece, who had become an angel, and the message that Christina had heard was also passed on by a niece. I merely became a messenger, but the revelation is not false. The God of Light might not be omnipotent as you or others might think, but he does indeed exist. He just cannot directly interfere in this world. A niece said these words to Christina while explaining her and the God of Light's existence. Eugene was aware of the story a niece had shared with Christina. Nonetheless, the God of Light did indeed exist and had intentions for the world. Perhaps 300 years ago, the God of Light had given Vermouth a revelation, informing him of the whereabouts of weapons that would help in the fight against the Demon Kings. While Eugene was deep in thought, Gundor had inspected several weapons and then picked up the ring. To the naked eye, it seemed like a valueless, worn antique. Yet Gundor examined it closely before exclaiming in admiration. This is an ancient artifact. I can't be sure, but it seems to be from an era similar to the other relics of the Great Vermouth, commented Gundor. It's said to possess the miracle of a god from ancient times, said Eugene. So it's a divine artifact just like the Holy Sword? Asked Gundor. It doesn't glow like the Holy Sword though, responded Eugene. The power within the Ring of Ogoroth was cruel and straightforward compared to the Holy Sword. This ring drained the life of its owner, stealing their future. Could resurrect a body meant for death multiple times over to fight. Do you know which god's divine artifact it is? Asked Gundor. Ogoroth, Eugene answered, not expecting much. The god of war. Gundor chuckled as he examined the inside of the ring. How did you know? Eugene asked, surprised. Mr. Eugene, like Lady Sienna, do you also think dwarves are an ignorant race only good for hammering? Accused Gundor. Well, not exactly. Eugene couldn't deny that he had somewhat thought so. Gundor squinted at Eugene's awkward expression. To think even a human would have such an opinion of you. Listen, Mr. Eugene. Dwarves are a refined and intellectual race. We possess vast knowledge, especially in ancient languages and history, said Gundor. Is that so? Eugene said dryly. Indeed. Dwarves are artisans who hammer metal, miners who swing pickaxes and excavators, Gundor said assertively while shaking the ring. In particular, in the southern islands where Hammer Island is located, there are several legends about Ogoroth. Eugene had benefited from that worn-out ring several times, especially during his battle with Ryzakia. Without the Ring of Ogoroth, he would have perished long ago. Before that, he had received help at the Fount of Light and also when battling against Gavid Lindman. Each time it was when he invoked the light of the Holy Sword. The Ring of Ogoroth had run rampant and amplified Eugene's holy power. He had received assistance several times, yet any knowledge about Ogoroth, the supposed master of the ring, remained elusive. It was Ariardel who had given the ring to Eugene. She had spoken of ancient times, eras so distant that even dragons who lived for eons could not recall. She had spoken of a time of legends when the god of light and others truly existed. Would a god from that age still be alive now? It was uncertain if death could even touch a deity, but there was no nation on the current continent that worshipped the war god Agarath. From Gundor's tales, it appeared that even the islands of the southern seas did not retain their faith in Agarath. If only the farthest islands of the southern seas remember him, I wonder how he got such a grandiose title as the God of War? Eugene scoffed while glancing at Agarath's ring. Hearing this, Gundor looked at Eugene with a mix of disdain and pity, shaking his head. This place might be a sea now, but in ancient times it wasn't. What nonsense is that? Eugene exclaimed. It means that with the passage of eons what was not a sea became one, said Gundor. You're saying that this vast sea was once land what hundreds, no thousands of years ago? Where did all this water come from then? Questioned Eugene. Perhaps a great flood. Gundor's suggestion was rudely interrupted. Oh, come on. Eugene decided Gundor's words weren't worth hearing. Insulted, Gundor shuddered and spat. There are tales of a deluge from the distant seas. What's that about? Eugene asked, annoyed. The end of the southern sea. You know that the world is round, right? Gundor asked. Of course I know that, Eugene said, irritated. But you see, no one has confirmed whether the ends of the north and the south truly connect, continued Gundor. In the northern kingdom of Ruhr, at its northernmost point lay Ruguyaran, a barren land where one should not venture. It was known as the end of the world. Climb Lahanjar. Look upon Ruguyaran. Guard against what comes from that end. In the dead of night, the Nur rose from Ruguyaran. The Nur walked the vast expanse, crossing Lahanjar. The sleepless children were devoured by the Nur. Molin stood guard, ensuring that the end did not encroach. The end of the southern sea, the distant seas. No one knows what lies there. Throughout history, countless explorers have ventured beyond the southern seas to step onto the frozen northern lands, but none have ever succeeded, said Gundor. 3 centuries passed. A question had once been posed to Molin. Had he ever beheld Ruguyaran? It was a vast land. A terrain where the skies were ablaze in wrath. There was no sun, no moon, and no stars. The sky was a murky shade akin to soil-trodden snow, and it stretched endlessly. Standing atop the highest peak of Lahanjar, I could glimpse the distant sea from the edge of Ruguyaran, a frozen expanse of ocean. There was no Nur. No one lived there and no one could survive. Eugene, alongside Anise, Christina, and Molin, had gazed upon Ruguyaran. Truly, it had been a land devoid of life. Gray earth, gray skies, and gray air. All was of that hue, void and barren. In this eerie and foreboding space, the only presence was the corpses of the many Nur, discarded by Molin. After slaying Iris, Eugene would go see Molin with Sienna. Eugene recalled Molin's smiling face as he saw them off. A tale from antiquity, Gundor interjected with a cough. An era of myth where gods were believed real. Such bygone days have passed, have they not? What became of the prosperous civilizations? Buried deep within the earth or submerged beneath the sea. Merely traces of them remain. Eugene stayed deep in thought, listening to Gundor's words. Evidence suggests that long ago the southern sea was once land. While the fate of other civilizations remains unknown, one that existed in this sea met its end by being submerged, said Gundor. Are you saying that waters from the far distant seas flooded in to create the southern seas? Asked Eugene. Eugene shook his head while considering the many apocalyptic theories related to the ancient era. But he couldn't help finding Gundor's words somewhat plausible when he connected them to the edge of the world. Enough of these uncertain tales. Do you have more knowledge about Agarath? Asked Eugene. There's a legend of Agarath's sacred ground somewhere in the southern sea, responded Gundor. Below the sea? Eugene inquired. It could be hidden on an undiscovered island. Gundor suggested vaguely. So nothing certain then? Eugene sounded disappointed. That's how legends tend to be. Gundor grumbled while waving Agarath's ring. Eugene scoffed before taking a seat. Then polish that ring so it shines. Whether Agarath is dead or alive, if you take care of his treasure he might be pleased enough to reveal the sacred ground, said Eugene. What do you even think gods are? Gundor questioned curiously. Beings whose existence is uncertain. While the world goes to hell they only watch from their lofty perches like spectators, Eugene retorted. Unbecoming words from the hero. A bit startled, Gundor set down his bag. Swift movements of his stout arms transformed the empty space into a respectable workshop. Well, let's start with the polishing. Will it take long? Eugene asked. Only as much as sharpening a blade. Shouldn't be too time-consuming, Gundor commented. Hurry then. There's another favor I wish to ask, said Eugene. Favor? Gundor looked up puzzled. Rather than explain, Eugene decided to show the dwarf. He pulled an item from beneath his cloak and tossed it before Gundor. Gundor's eyes widened in astonishment when he saw the dragon's scales. Enhance. Chapter 351. The Door 1. Gundor was indeed a master craftsman, but given the rarity of the material, naturally he'd never handled an entire dragon carcass before. Yet he possessed the knowledge handed down from his ancestors. There weren't many precedents, but in ancient times, some dragons had donated their bodies for the betterment of the world. Most of the remains left from these dragons had been processed by the hands of dwarves, and the knowledge from those times was passed down to later generations like Gundor. If you desire armor infused with the latest technology, it would undoubtedly be Exit, he declared. Even as they discussed Eugene's request, Gundor did not rest his hands. The once tarnished ring of Ogoroth was swiftly polished, shining like new. Gundor wasn't particularly fond of Exit, but he acknowledged its performance. Moreover, while he didn't care for it much, he had near-perfect knowledge concerning its creation. But crafting Exit takes too long. Especially if we use materials from a dragon, it might take several months at least, Gundor commented as he continued polishing the ring. There were also concerns about the available tools. Though he had turned this room into a makeshift workshop, it paled in comparison to his true workshop on Hammer Island. While Sienna and Eugene could assist in firepower, the rest of the tools were lacking. I don't expect Exit immediately. Just scale armor to protect the torso will do, responded Eugene. Is it for you? Gundor inquired. No, Eugene shook his head. Armor made from a dragon's corpse? It certainly was tempting, but he felt no immediate need for a hastily crafted set of armor. It was better for him to simply cast an aura shield around himself. It's for Seal and Desra. I've already told them about it, said Eugene. Who knew what perils lay at sea? While those two could certainly fend off most dangers, considering their upcoming battle with Iris as a mere danger would be overly presumptuous. In a week's time, a punitive force would set out from Shetter, one of the central islands of Shimuan. This force would sail for over a month to reach the Salgalta Sea, the territory of the Pirate Empress. Moreover, there was always a possibility that the group might encounter Iris even before reaching the Salgalta Sea. However, Eugene believed such a thing was unlikely. No matter how foolish Iris might be, she wouldn't leave the advantage of staying in her home territory. Scale armor. Gundor mused while scratching his chin in thought. It wasn't Exit nor was it full-plate armor. It wouldn't take long to craft if it was just armor to protect the torso. A week on land. That's hardly any time. I might have to continue working even on the ship, Gundor said after making some mental calculations. Various designs floated in his mind. He had never imagined a day when he would work with an entire dragon carcass, especially materials from Rhyzakia, the dragon that had oppressed his kin and enslaved them in the Demon Dragon Castle. Gundor could hardly contain his excitement and grinned broadly. Come out. Eugene motioned and Rhaenyra stepped out with a look of confusion. When she sensed his intentions, her expression grew more complex. Benefactor, first and foremost, this lady bears the bloodline of the Black Dragon, said Rhaenyra. So what? Eugene questioned. The idea of using this lady's dragon breath as a heat source for the forge. Isn't it a bit blasphemous? Questioned Rhaenyra. Since when were you the dutiful daughter who concerned herself with such matters? Retorted Eugene. Rhaenyra couldn't argue and her expression became sullen. Of course, she held no filial piety towards her deceased father. Now that she knew the entire truth, she harbored only disdain and contempt for the dreadful demonic dragon. Think of it as revenge, Eugene suggested. Benefactor is too cruel. Rhaenyra complained. If you truly object, I won't force you. Both Sienna and I will be busy for the upcoming week, and there's no one else I could ask. Eugene let his words trail off deliberately. Rhaenyra just couldn't believe what she heard. She was deeply touched and stared at Eugene with wide eyes and trembling shoulders. She swiftly approached Eugene and clasped both his hands. Benefactor trusts this lady so much. Shouldn't this lady reciprocate that trust? Her voice sounded emotional. Yes, yes. Eugene nodded his head as if this was only natural. You needn't worry, benefactor. This lady will collaborate with the dwarf as you've requested, and benefactor, you can focus on your tasks, Rhaenyra said. Her long horns swayed gently before Eugene's eyes as she gave a slight bow. He hesitated for a moment, then patted her head as she wished. Only then did Rhaenyra turn around with a satisfied expression. She then addressed Gundor, little dwarf. This lady's name is Rhaenyra. This lady will provide the flames for the forge. You just focus on your hammering. Gundor was taken back. He couldn't find the right words to respond with. The bloodline of the Black Dragon? Did that mean the petite horned girl before him was a hatchling of the Black Dragon? I'll leave you to it then, said Eugene. He left the room after retrieving Agarotha's ring and placing it on his finger. Only a week remained before their departure. It wasn't enough time. They would be sailing for over a month on the sea. He wished to conclude everything within this week. Eugene traversed the corridor, descended the stairs, and glanced outside a window. He saw Seal and Desra teaming up against Carmen in a friendly spar. He watched their duel for a brief moment before continuing his descent. The mansion's basement was originally a small storage room for food supplies. That was not the case anymore. Its structure had been magically expanded and fortified. Eugene removed his cloak. He was about to toss it aside carelessly, but Christina, who had approached unnoticed, caught it with both hands. She held the cloak close while giving a faint smile. Without a word, she took several steps back. It's almost done. Sienna sat in the heart of the chamber with Mare at her side. Uncharacteristically pensive, Sienna moved her hands with deep concentration. Whoosh! Dozens of intricate magical circles floated before her to overlap and form a fist-sized orb. This orb embodied the magic formula that constituted Mare. Sienna carefully manipulated the adjusted formula while observing its rotations. The formula she had envisioned since her days at the Lionheart estate was finally complete. With a satisfied expression, Sienna gently stroked Mare's head. The orb, which had been suspended in mid-air, slowly descended before merging into Mare's chest. Mare did not immediately open her eyes. The addition to her existing formula was both vast and intricate. Watching the formula adjust to the familiar's physique, Sienna spoke. I've added my signature to Mare. Empress Rule. It was a signature that had once toyed with the Green Tower head and 8th Circle Archwizard. Sienna had trifled with him as if he were but a child. This magic interfered with and dominated any spell within a designated space. Although Empress Rule could not grasp control over black magic, it could still interfere with it. After all, black magic was still magic at its core. It was just the source of the power that differed. When Sienna herself employed it, Empress Rule could dominate any magic below the 9th Circle. Throughout history, only Sienna had reached the 9th Circle. This meant she held a significant advantage in any duel against other wizards. Of course, this fact only applied when Sienna was using Empress Rule directly. Even if Mare was a finely crafted familiar, she couldn't harness Empress Rule on par with Sienna. I've made Mare a kind of trigger. Think of it simply, Eugene. Haven't you always received magical support from Mare? Now, added to that support is the wise Sienna's signature, Sienna said, sounding pleased. With a mischievous grin, she leaned closer. Mare was linked to Eugene, and in future battles, Mare could employ Empress Rule at Eugene's will. The mana required to activate it is substantial, but you should be able to handle it with ease. Let's see. Its range? Roughly this mansion's expanse. It can be extended, but there's hardly a need. Simply being within its domain allows for interference. Within this domain, any wizard weaker than you can never kill you with magic, explained Sienna. The term weaker than me sounds vague, doesn't it? Questioned Eugene. It refers to the circles, but willpower also plays a major role. After all, magic is the manifestation of will through mana. Strictly speaking, Eugene, you aren't a true 8th Circle Archwizard. But your willpower and a mix of other elements put you on par with one. Sienna rose while cradling Mare in her arms. Christina approached Sienna and took Mare from her. She wrapped the still unconscious Mare in her cloak and retreated to a corner. That's why your current challenge isn't simple, commented Sienna. In a week I'll break through it. Eugene frowned in frustration. Indeed, as Sienna mentioned, the task was far from easy. Eugene's white flame formula. At present, Eugene's white flame formula bore 6 stars. Through the trial of the dark room, the white flame formula transformed to resonate perfectly with Eugene, evolving into a flame of a deep violet hue. Mingled within Eugene's mana was the lightning flame that took shape from the spirits of the world tree. Such elements alone made Eugene's white flame formula special. However, there were even more elements integrated into his technique. Eugene had seen the eternal whole through Sienna's witchcraft. It had already been 4 years since Eugene created the ring flame formula after being inspired by the eternal whole. It feels like it's on the brink of a breakthrough, yet it is not, he mused. Eugene narrowed his eyes and placed a hand over his heart. To be frank, it wasn't a time to complain about any lack. While Eugene's white flame formula had 6 stars, when combined with lightning flame and the ring flame formula, it could exert firepower far surpassing its original level. Additionally, Eclipse and the empty sword enhanced the amount of damage he could inflict on his enemies. And what if he considered the overlapping effects of prominence and ignition? Although he only had 6 stars, Eugene's power might rival that of the 7th or even the 8th star white flame formula. I can't be completely sure, Eugene kept mulling over the problem. Unfortunately, he had no choice but to accept the fact that in the 300-year history of the Lionheart clan, only Vermouth had reached the pinnacle of the white flame formula. Among his descendants, the highest anyone achieved was 7 stars. I am definitely stronger than 7 stars. As for the 8th star, I've neither seen nor heard anything about it, so it's hard to be sure. Both the late Doyne's Lionheart, the previous head elder, and Carmen Lionheart had reached the 7 stars in the white flame formula. Eugene had never seen either of them at full power, but still he never felt that their flames were stronger than his. Vermouth. Eugene's thoughts finally stopped on his old comrade. Vermouth was the only point of comparison. Back then, the term white flame formula didn't even exist. But the pure white flames that surrounded Vermouth, even thinking of them now was overwhelming. It was the same in the memories Sienna showed him. Sienna had been holding back because she had been against Vermouth, and since they had been in Hamel's tomb. Even so, there had been an evident disparity of power between Sienna and Vermouth. The powerful magic of the eternal whole had barely posed a threat to Vermouth. On the contrary, an unknown spell from Vermouth had shattered Sienna's magic, leaving a gaping hole in her chest. Ahem. Sienna let out a soft cough, noting the seriousness on Eugene's face. She stretched out her hand and frost appeared in her grasp. A soft glow emerged beneath her feet with a simple swing of her pristine white staff. Sienna raised the tip of her foot. The pool of light beneath her feet spread wide, painting both the floor and the walls of the room. Characters carved within transformed the entire room into the epicenter of a complex magic circle. "Shall we begin then?" she asked. Eugene nodded and began to move. The only time he felt a lack of power had been in his battle against Raizakia. Had he held on a little longer, just a tad more, he might have slain Raizakia by himself. No, not just holding on. He might have won if he had fought a bit better. Raizakia wasn't even at his peak, Eugene thought, frustrated at his own lacking performance. In fact, he had been weaker than he had been 300 years ago. If he failed to vanquish a foe like Raizakia by himself, how was he to face the likes of Noor Giabella or Gavid Lindman, who were clearly much stronger? And what of the Demon King of Incarceration waiting atop Babel's Peak, or the Demon King of Destruction, who was lingering silently in Revesta? Still, there was no need to battle alone. As it had been 300 years ago, he would be joined by allies in combat when he faced such adversaries. However, Eugene had no intention of using the presence of his comrades as an excuse to turn a blind eye to his own weaknesses and frailties. If he was deficient, he had to compensate. If he was feeble, he had to grow stronger. Even more than Vermouth, Eugene declared to himself. Eugene sat at the heart of the magic circle. Sienna stood behind him. She focused her energy while raising frost high above her head. With a resounding roar, another vast magic circle appeared behind her. Creak creak. The characters forming the magic circles intertwined and began to rotate slowly. A smaller circle also appeared around Sienna at its center. "This reminds me of my previous life. Do you remember?" Eugene asked. "I don't think it'll be as easy as it was back then," responded Sienna. Taking a pause, she reiterated, "No, definitely not. The mana technique you practiced in your past life was rather rudimentary and crappy. But the white flame formula, and the ring flame formula you crafted. Even to my astute eyes they seem exceptionally perfect. Honestly, there's not much to adjust on that end. Sienna reached out to Eugene while maintaining the eternal whole. She continued with the explanation, rather than adjusting, it's more like breaking through. Or should I say shattering? Hearing this, Eugene couldn't help but warn her, be careful. If the core were to get destroyed. Don't fret. Do you really think I can't control her power to that extent? Trust me, Sienna interrupted him, sounding displeased. To be honest, I trust Anise and Christina more than you, Eugene said while glancing at the wall. Catching his gaze, Christina grinned and waved. Worry not. Whatever happens, we will ensure you don't perish, said Christina. Right. His trust was well placed in her words. With resolve, Eugene closed his eyes. Eugene's white flame formula had long lingered at 6 stars. It felt as though it was on the brink of evolving yet remained steadfast in its current form. By his own reckoning, he lacked the necessary power. The white flame formula, now optimized with the addition of lightning flame and the ring flame formula, boasted power that far surpassed any others with 6 stars. Thus, advancing beyond required even greater power. It was for this reason that he sought Sienna's aid. Using the expansive magic circle etched throughout the room, they examined the entirety of the mana flow within Eugene's body. However, such an expansive magic circle wasn't necessary for merely observing the mana flow. It was designed not only to observe but also to interfere. Sienna concentrated intensely as she reached out. Eugene and Sienna's consciousness synchronized. Eugene first activated his white flame formula. Whoosh! A violet flame enveloped Eugene with crackling currents flowing across it. Feeling a tingling sensation on her skin, Sienna placed her hands upon the flame. If it hurts, let me know, Sienna whispered. Instead of responding, Eugene clenched his teeth and closed his eyes. Boom! The sound echoed from within his mind and body. It was the noise of Sienna's magic, her mana, and the eternal whole, all striking at Eugene's core. Boom! The same noise reverberated once more. The cycle of the 6 stars was disrupted by the impact of the brute force. Boom! Eugene's teeth shattered and blood dripped from his clenched fists. Agarotha's ring began to emanate a soft red glow after becoming drenched in his blood. Eugene withstood the onslaught without uttering a scream. It'd be better to die. That thought resonated within him. Judging by the state of things, it seemed he'd have to endure this hundreds of times over the next week. Boom! The next jolt wiped away Eugene's thoughts entirely.